Hello everyone, and welcome back to the OurSociety Experiment. In today's Making the Movement episode, we're going to talk about the theory of treating society like a technology, one of the core OurSociety principles. Now, society can be comprised of a number of things, but specifically when we refer to society, we're referring to our systems of being, right? So that could be, for example, like the market economy as it exists today, our legal structures in regards to property and contract, our educational institutions, how we fund them, for example, through local municipalities. It could be democracy, right? Democracy is certainly part of society. It's our form of chosen government. All of these systems of being, essentially, are what we would consider social technologies. Okay? And we define them as technologies because they were created by individuals to serve a purpose. They have a user in mind, and they serve that user, and they receive updates, right, as time goes on, updates through essentially legislation to kind of update and improve them. So in a sense, they already are viewed as technologies. However, because they are social technologies, the pace of progress is slow. It's typically slow by design in many cases, which has its purpose. But the argument we'll present today in this Making the Movement is that we as a collective should view our democracy, specifically we'll focus on democracy for our discussion, we should view it as a social technology, and we should view it through the same lens we would view any other technology today, which means we would constantly seek to innovate and experiment with the technology in order to improve it, to give a better experience for the users, in this case, the American citizenry. So before we get into the examples of how we could do this, let's talk about why we would want to do this first, right? Let's talk about why it's important, especially for today. So the argument is that technology is now increasing at an exponential rate, which means it's doubling in processing power related to the size and cost of the hardware every year. And this is identified by Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns. Essentially, if you imagine a bell curve, we're starting to see exponential growth. And if you can imagine a bell curve, we're kind of at the knee of the curve. Or a better example might be if you're on a roller coaster, right, and then you're looking up. As you click up the track, the only difference between the roller coaster analogy is the top of the roller coaster is so far up in the air that you can't see it. So you're just standing there slowly clicking along. And technology now is starting to accelerate. So not only is the exponential, the growth rate is accelerating, as I just mentioned, but also the distance between exponential leaps is also accelerating, which means that they're happening in shorter time periods. So this is important, like this just general discussion about technology and how quickly it's growing is important to the case of viewing democracy as a technology, because it paints a very clear picture mathematically of where we're going to be. Not in terms of the exact improvements, I would never be so bold as to predict what kind of technology is going to exist in 20 years from now. However, we can mathematically predict how much processing power is going to exist in that time, and we can imagine what kind of technologies that would enable and empower that don't exist today. This understanding is really important to understanding democracy as a technology, because what we're seeing happening is with this rapid expansion of technological innovation, more and more problems are beginning to be solved that affect the entire populace by for-profit organizations. And government, in its traditional model of a representative democracy that we have now, is slow by design. So what ends up happening is we typically react to problems, or for example, we typically see major innovations in legislation as a reaction to crisis, right? So something goes really wrong, and then legislation is put out to solve it. So for example, the 2008 financial crisis happens, and then new regulations are introduced. Another example would be 9/11, right? 9/11 happens and new laws and regulations are put into place. Both of these being an example of legislative change, or to put it through the lens of technology, right? Software updates, patches, that are in reliance to crisis. So similar to a software that gets updated, imagine if Microsoft Windows only ever got updated, for example, when there was a problem. So they stopped innovating, they were just kind of patching holes. And that's kind of what the U.S. system of democracy is kind of going through right now, is we're seeing these major innovations. For example, social media, another example. Now this is on discussion now, after the crisis, so to speak, after we had a foreign power attempt to allegedly influence our election. Then now we're having the discussion. But that discussion could have been with a different form of government, with a more proactive form of government. That could have existed. This discussion could have happened before the crisis occurred. And that's the argument, is that democracy is updated too slowly to keep pace with modern technology. So those are examples of crises, and really the only one that really is super relevant to this discussion is the Facebook example, the social media example, really Facebook and Twitter. But those two examples of Facebook and Twitter are really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what kind of problems could arise in the near future, especially as we continue innovations in artificial intelligence, in genetic engineering, in communication, in miniaturization. And finally, one that I think is very apparent to many of us is automation, right? Robotics. And these are all innovations that have incredible potential for humanity, and we believe should be pursued fervently. However, the problem is these innovations, these technologies in the corporate and private sector, for example, automation, they have tremendous social impact that we're not dealing with proactively. So if we treated democracy like a true technology, like we would any other commercial technology, we as a collective would seek legislation preventatively to deal with some of the issues that are happening. So for example, with automation, if you take a warehouse of manufacturers, physical labor, and you put in robots, then you have a large swath of people who are now unemployed. And more importantly than just being unemployed, they don't necessarily have a skill set to transfer into industries, right? They can't enter, for example, the knowledge economy that exists in Silicon Valley. The challenge with that is that the knowledge economy is the future. That is the direction that all economies are moving. So if we understand that that's direction, why are we not, as a collective, choosing to be more proactive about how we retrain individuals or how we deal with this large-scale unemployment? While we're on examples, we'll give one more. The transportation industry. Right? There's 3.5 million truck drivers in the U.S. There's 500,000 approximately private car drivers, taxis and the black cars, and private chauffeurs. We're going to see innovations within our lifetime, for example, of completely automated driverless electric cars. So that's another 4 million people that are going to be out of work who have a very specific skill set that is not easily transferable to different industries. So again, being proactive about our democracy, being proactive of seeing these problems, seeing how technology is going to impact our economy, and of course looking at from the perspective of the collective whole and the greater good. A driverless network of cars and trucks, automated and electric, is a phenomenal societal advance. It would allow freedom of transportation on levels that are unheard of right now. It would reduce the need for consuming cars, right? There wouldn't be the need for constant consumerism of these vehicles. It would allow us to dramatically lessen our impact on the environment. It would reduce congestion. It would allow freedom of movement for individuals, which is has a ton of other benefits as well. For example, freedom of movement would allow states to be even more experimental under the federalist system of kind of their laws and legislation within that state, right? States are supposed to act as laboratories for experiment. So again, these technologies have a profoundly positive impact. But if we don't speed up the pace of our democracy, and if we don't choose to treat it like a technology by consistently updating and proactively building upon it in a pace that is really going to keep up with the innovation in the private sector, well, then we have these crises. Then we have these, for example, unemployment that we just mentioned. And that's kind of the basic nature of our argument, is technology is moving so quickly that democracy needs to fundamentally change. It needs to be reimagined from a number of levels to keep pace with this growth, to allow our collective whole to transcend into the knowledge economy, because a knowledge economy is going to be a source of experimentation and innovation like we've never seen before. So these are all things that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about reimagining our democracy. Is what is the big picture, and what is the reality, the truth of the situation we're in right now in terms of the growth of technology, especially in the private sector. One final note before we get into how we might do this, some examples. I think it's important to consider, and something that all of us should consider individually, and I would love to hear your perspective if you want to leave comments below on the next statement. If we as a collective choose not to innovate our democracy and choose not to speed up the process of politics and government, we may face a real existential challenge in that the society as a whole may continue more than ever to seek public solutions from for-profit enterprises. And I think that's a very, very dangerous pathway. And the reason I would say that is statistically we know in the US we have the most stratified wealth in the entire planet, which means that the gap between our poorest individuals and our wealthiest is so large. As noted in the book The Spirit Level by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, the impacts of wealth stratification like we have in the US are pretty tremendous, and there's a lot of correlating data that ties wealth inequality to a lot of social problems ranging from obesity, education, trust, health, and more. So there's really a lot of data that suggests that we must change, otherwise things are going to continue to get worse as things get better. So then this raises the question, if we accepted that we wanted to treat democracy like a technology, well, where would we start? What would we do? Right? And I think the first thing we'd have to do is we'd have to make efforts to radically increase participation within our democracy. We hear a lot of arguments that, for example, you see really the pendulums of politics, the temperature of politics now is stratifying even further. Where there used to be a lot of centrist politics, now the left is seeking a more socialist atmosphere, right? And the right is seeing a more authoritarian, the hard right and the hard left. And we believe both of those are not the correct method. In fact, we believe the opposite. We don't need a revolution of systems. We need more democracy. Because our democracy is incredibly resilient, and it would function much better if we could enable more people and empower more individuals to become involved. Again, that's obviously core to our society's purpose, is increasing civic engagement through technological innovation. So we are at our society, we're focusing on an election campaign platform, right? Running a free and open platform to run political campaigns on at any level, from school board to the president. The idea is every individual should have access to that information and the individual's mandates in a transparent, non-showmanship way, just direct issue-based focus. And for those of us who are unengaged in politics or don't have the time or even willpower at the moment, we should also have a method to make it as easy as possible to make the right decisions. Our society accomplishes that through our societal value matching algorithms. So again, we make the process as deep as an individual would like to go, so those who want to know can access all of that information. And we make the process as easy for those who don't have the time, so they're still voting within their best interests. And I believe that that is something that statistically we are aware of, is in certain areas of the US, individual groups of voters unknowingly vote against their own best interests. They vote for policies and individuals who do things like cut social programs, but they happen to be, for example, the most impoverished areas of the US. So again, increasing the pace of democracy and allowing people to make better decisions easier would be one of the first steps to kind of radically increasing participation, which would be key to treating democracy like a technology. And that key leads into our second point. If we view democracy through the lens of technology, we would eliminate the need to focus on such radical and competitive ideological differences, and instead focus on data-driven cooperative projects. So again, through the OurSociety platform, people talk about their value profiles, they share their information with us. We as a non-partisan nonprofit aggregate that data, identify trends, and release it back to the public to identify our most collaborative trends. This allows us to focus on the greater common good instead of the individual representatives for specific states. We have this competitive system, but the reality is that federalist system of the states acting as separate nations and having representative democracy, it's a great system, but it's outdated. We are interconnected at a level that the founding fathers could have never conceived of. I mean, it would be like asking you to conceive of technologies for 250 years from now. I mean, we can all take a guess, but it's in no way, shape, or form a realistic estimate of what could be. And I think that's really critical, is we just have to face the reality of our situation, the system is a strong system, it's a strong core base. But if we focused on radically improving it and doing more collective projects instead of having 50 different competitors all fighting for their own interests, and did more group projects for the entire nation, that would be pretty tremendous. And again, many of the challenges that prevent the criticism to that argument would be it's impossible, right? There's these challenges, how do you get people to agree? But many of the challenges have always surrounded logistics, right? If you talk about large-scale projects, logistics and cost are going to be the two big ones. But logistics and costs are both going to be driven down tremendously over the next 10 years through automation technology, revolutions in energy technology, robotics. So, I mean, it is going to fundamentally shift the landscape. So it's going to enable us to do these kind of new imagined projects. And the OurSociety purpose is to kind of help spread the word and provide pathways for us as a collective to begin to embrace that future, because that is the direction. Whether or not your ideologies align with it, the data is clear. Technology is accelerating, and it is bringing us closer together than ever. Finally, the last thing that would be required to view democracy through the lens of technology would be to increase the pace of politics. And again, we can do that through our technological advances. I mean, just better feedback loops, more direct contact with constituents. This is starting really from a municipality level and above. If we could interconnect communities, one of our society's other experiments that we're not focusing on at the moment is the community engagement platform. And it's about 75% complete, and we're really happy with it, and we're looking forward to pursuing it in the future. But the reality is our communities have so much untapped human potential that we could really have a truly innovative and experimental system of government and higher citizen engagement just by providing the necessary tools to do so. If we as a collective in the U.S. chose to make our focus maximizing the human potential of every individual, we would see an era of unprecedented innovation, experimentation, and just growth. But it's hard to have incredible levels of growth when a large portion of your population is living paycheck to paycheck. It's hard to have exponential levels of growth when you have people who have to worry about how they're going to pay for a doctor's visit if their child gets ill. And just speaking from a personal perspective, these kind of questions that we're kind of bringing up in terms of the national direction, obviously we want the data to determine it, but they really are almost existential questions of what it means to be human in 2018 and beyond. I think one of the big challenges, especially with more traditionalists when it comes to U.S. government, is they're taking rules and regulations and concepts that were that helped define what it was to be human in the 1700s. But it's 2018, and I think that's why we need to really kind of reconsider where we are. But that begins internally. That begins with all of us saying, well, what kind of life do we want? Our society has been criticized as being a little bit utopian, in that it's and as an insult. But I would argue if we're not as a collective focusing on utopia, focusing on creating a utopian society, then we have a failure of imagination. Because at its core, if we're not working for a more utopian society for all of us, what's the point? Why are we, what are we doing? And I believe that this is the time, we have the opportunity now, more than ever, now is the time to kind of take this and move forward with it and make a new agenda for the collective whole that could bring us into the new era of technology, the new era of being a human in 2018 and beyond. So that concludes our discussion about viewing democracy through the lens of technology. Thanks so much for tuning into the OurSociety Experiment. We'll see you next time.